Before my sister's wedding, my parents gave me 5 conditions. Do all of them, and we will let you come. I smiled, booked a beach vacation to Hawaii, and mailed one last gift. As my sister opened it in front of hundreds of guests, she screamed in terror. My name is Harper. I am 32 years old, and I'm about to show my family exactly what happens when you mistake my silence for weakness. The clinking of fine porcelain and the low hum of jazz filled the Buckhead coffee shop. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp Atlanta day where the city elite gathered to show off their latest designer purchases. I sat at a corner booth sipping my black coffee, watching my family treat the waitstaff like personal servants. My mother, Clarice, adjusted the collar of her silk blouse and slid a heavy cream-colored envelope across the marble table. It stopped right next to my cup. "Read it," she commanded, her voice dropping into that familiar authoritative register she saved for public spaces. "Your father and I spent all night drafting this with Julian and Vanessa." I did not touch the envelope. I looked at my younger sister, Vanessa. She was 28, busy admiring the reflection of her engagement ring in her phone screen, completely ignoring my presence. Next to her sat Julian Preston, her fiancé. Julian was 33, white, and carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed his last name alone demanded a red carpet. He wore a tweed blazer that screamed fake old money, his posture rigid as he looked at me down the bridge of his nose. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "It is a behavioral contract, Harper. My family is flying in from Martha's Vineyard for the ceremony at the Azure Estate. The Prestons are very traditional. We value discretion, modesty, and class. We cannot afford any loud or unrefined disruptions." I kept my eyes locked on Julian, though I addressed my mother. "A behavioral contract for a wedding." My father, Desmond, finally spoke. He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw set. "Do not make that face, Harper. Your sister is marrying into a prominent family. This is the biggest day of her life. We are just making sure you understand your place so you do not ruin it. Open the envelope." I slowly reached out and broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cardstock with 5 meticulously typed bullet points. I read the first one out loud. Condition 1. Harper will cover the cost of the premium open bar, estimated at $85,000. I looked up. "You want me to pay $85,000 for alcohol at a wedding I am barely welcome at?" Julian scoffed, swirling his sparkling water. "Consider it an entrance fee. You work in some corporate cubicle, right? You single women always have extra disposable income since you do not have families to support. Besides, my parents are covering the string quartet. It is only fair you contribute." I looked at Vanessa. She finally put her phone down, flashing a completely hollow smile. "It is an investment in our family, Harper. You should be honored." I looked back down at the paper. Condition 2. Harper will wear the pre-approved slate gray dress provided by the bridal party. My mother nodded firmly. I picked it out myself. It is very modest. Julian's mother has very specific tastes, and we cannot have you showing up in one of your usual bright colors. You have a tendency to draw the wrong kind of attention, Harper. We need you to blend into the background. Vanessa is the star. We cannot have anyone thinking you are trying to outshine her." I stared at my mother, absorbing the sheer audacity of her words. She wanted me invisible. I moved to the next line. Condition 3. Harper is strictly forbidden from discussing her career or financial status with any member of the Preston family. Julian let out a short, patronizing laugh. "No offense, Harper, but my relatives are hedge fund managers and senators. We do not want them feeling uncomfortable by you complaining about your 9-to-5 office job or talking about whatever middle-class struggles you deal with. It is just a bad look. We want to present a united elite front." I leaned back in my leather chair. "A bad look. Because I work for a living." Julian smirked. "Let us just say old money families like mine prefer in-laws who understand the art of quiet wealth, not people who are loud and broke. We are trying to elevate this family. Try not to drag us down." I felt a cold, calculated calm wash over me. The racist undertone in his voice was not even thinly veiled. It was sitting right there on the marble table, loud and clear. My parents, desperate for the validation of a white, wealthy son-in-law, just nodded along in eager agreement. I read the fourth point. Condition 4. Harper will attend the ceremony unaccompanied. No +1 allowed. We do not have the budget to feed whatever random guy you might drag off the street, Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. And honestly, your taste in men is embarrassing. We cannot risk you bringing someone who does not know which fork to use for the salad course. I did not bother telling her I had no intention of bringing anyone. I just read the final line. The letters seemed to burn into the paper. Condition 5. Harper will legally sign over grandmother's diamond heirloom necklace to Vanessa to serve as her something old for the ceremony. The cafe around me seemed to fade into absolute silence. The diamond necklace was the only thing my grandmother had explicitly left to me before she passed away. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a promise. My grandmother was the only person in this family who ever saw my potential, the only one who told me I was destined for greatness. I placed the paper back on the table, folding my hands in my lap. You want my necklace? Clarice sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. It is entirely wasted on you, Harper. When do you ever attend galas or society events? You sit at home working all weekend. Vanessa is marrying a Preston. She needs heirlooms. She needs to show his family that she comes from a lineage of elegance. She comes from a lineage of people who max out credit cards to buy designer bags they cannot afford, I said, my voice dangerously low. Desmond slammed his hand flat against the table. The sound made a nearby waitress jump. You will watch your tone, young lady. Your sister is stepping into a life you could only dream of. You will give her that necklace, and you will sign the transfer papers today. I looked straight into my father's eyes. The same eyes that had watched me cry at 18 when I found out my college savings account was empty. Do you really want to talk about transferring assets, Dad? I asked. My tone was like ice. Do you want to talk about how Julian's family values class and accountability? Because I remember being 18 years old working 2 back-to-back shifts at a diner trying to save every penny for my freshman year tuition. And I remember waking up to find my bank account completely drained. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting to Julian. Stop bringing the past up, Harper. No, let us bring it up. I continued, my voice unwavering. Julian, since you love discretion and class so much, did Vanessa tell you why my college fund disappeared? Did she mention her little joyride in Dad's car? The one where she crashed into a storefront while completely intoxicated. Julian frowned, looking at Vanessa. What is she talking about? Vanessa's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. It was a misunderstanding. I was young. It was a felony, I corrected sharply. But Mom and Dad could not let their golden child go to jail, could they? They could not let the country club know their perfect daughter was facing a DUI. So they took $30,000 out of my college fund to pay off the property damage and hire a high-powered defense attorney to keep her record clean. I had to drop my university acceptance and take out massive loans just to survive. Clarice glared at me, her lips pursed in absolute fury. We did what we had to do to protect this family. You were always smart. We knew you would figure it out. Vanessa needed us. She needed consequences, I said. But you never gave her any. And now you sit here handing me a behavioral contract demanding I pay $85,000 for a party and trying to steal the only thing my grandmother left me. Desmond pointed a thick finger at my face. You listen to me very carefully. You are going to sign that list right now. You are going to transfer the necklace and you are going to pay the bar tab. If you do not, you can forget about coming to the wedding. In fact, if you walk out of here without signing that paper, I will call my lawyer and have you permanently removed from my will. You will not get a single cent of this family's money. You will be cut off completely. He leaned back, looking incredibly smug, fully expecting me to crumble. He thought his money was the ultimate leash. He thought the threat of losing my inheritance would force me into submission, just like it always worked on Vanessa. Julian let out a soft, mocking chuckle. Just sign the paper, Harper. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. You do not want to lose your family over some stubborn pride. I sat there in the corner booth of that beautiful cafe, listening to the classical music playing softly through the hidden speakers. I looked at my mother, who was already reaching into her designer bag to pull out a pen. I looked at my father, drunk on his own perceived power. I looked at Vanessa, basking in her stolen glory. And I looked at Julian, a man whose entire existence was a carefully constructed lie. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt absolutely incredibly free. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I did not take out a pen. I pulled out a heavy, solid metal black Centurion card. I placed it gently on the table, right on top of my coffee receipt. The metallic clink caught Julian's attention. His eyes flicked down to the card, and for a fraction of a second, his condescending smirk faltered. He recognized what that card meant. He knew the impossible financial requirements needed just to hold one. I picked up the cream-colored envelope containing their ridiculous demands. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it in half again. With a flick of my wrist, I dropped the shredded pieces directly into Julian's glass of sparkling water. The heavy paper sank to the bottom, dissolving into a soggy mess. "What are you doing?" Clarice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "I am declining your invitation," I said smoothly. "I decline all 5 conditions. I am not paying your bar tab. I am not wearing your ugly gray dress. I am not signing over my grandmother's diamonds. And I am absolutely not pretending to be less than I am to make a fake old money racist feel better about himself." Julian's face turned violently red. "You arrogant little..." I stood up, sliding my black card back into my wallet after signaling the waiter to charge it. "Do not worry about the will, Dad. I do not want your money. I never did. Keep it all for Vanessa. She is going to need every single penny very soon." I stepped out of the booth and looked down at them one last time. "Enjoy the wedding. I hear the Azure estate is beautiful this time of year." I did not wait for their response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the cafe, the glass doors shutting behind me, cutting off the sound of my father shouting my name. The morning air hit my face, crisp and refreshing. I walked straight to my car, a sleek black sedan parked in the VIP spot, and slid into the driver's seat. My heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm. The years of carrying their weight, their expectations, their constant belittling had just evaporated. I pulled out my phone and pressed a single button on my dashboard display. The call connected on the first ring. "Good morning, Harper." Gwen's crisp, professional voice filled the car. She was my executive assistant, the sharpest mind in my entire firm, and the only person who knew the full extent of the empire I had quietly built over the last decade. "Good morning, Gwen," I said, pulling out of the parking lot and merging onto the highway. "I need you to initiate a hostile buyout. Which property are we looking at?" "The Azure estate." I replied, my voice cool and precise. "The luxury resort out on the coast. I want full ownership of the property, the management company, and the hospitality contracts. Offer them 20% above market value if they close within 48 hours. There was a brief pause on the line as Gwen typed rapidly on her keyboard. "The Azure estate. Is not that the venue where your sister is getting married next weekend?" "Yes, it is." I smiled, gripping the steering wheel. "I want the deed in my hands by Friday. It is time I gave my family a proper wedding gift." "Consider it done, boss," Gwen said without missing a beat. "I will have the legal team draft the contracts immediately." I ended the call and merged into the fast lane. They wanted to play games with status, wealth, and power. They wanted to treat me like a peasant begging for a seat at their table. They had absolutely no idea that I did not just own a seat. I was about to own the entire restaurant. The buzzing of my phone against the mahogany desk was relentless. By the time I had navigated the downtown traffic and pulled into the private underground parking of my venture capital firm, my notifications were a chaotic blur of anger and accusation. Vanessa had wasted zero time. She had gone straight to her favorite weapon. I tapped the screen and opened Instagram. There was my sister broadcasting live to her thousands of followers from the passenger seat of Julian's vintage Porsche. Her makeup was perfectly smudged to look like she had been crying for hours. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, speaking in a trembling, fragile voice. "I just wanted my big sister to share in the happiest moment of my life." Vanessa sniffled into the camera. But some people are so consumed by jealousy and bitterness that they cannot stand to see anyone else succeed. She refused to help with the wedding. She insulted Julian. She even refused to let me borrow our late grandmother's necklace for my something old just out of pure spite. I am heartbroken, you guys. I just do not understand how family can be so cruel. The comments flooding the bottom of the screen were a chorus of sympathy for her and absolute venom for me. Her followers called me a bitter, lonely woman. They told Vanessa she was better off without my toxic energy. The smear campaign did not stop there. The extended family group chat was a war zone. Aunt Patricia texted a long paragraph about how I was a miserable embarrassment to the family name. Cousin Marcus told me I needed to humble myself and beg Julian for forgiveness. Then came a voicemail from my mother. I listened to it as I walked toward the private elevator. Clarice sounded breathless with rage. "You are dead to this family until you bring that necklace to my house and pay the bar tab," she hissed through the speaker. "You are a lonely, pathetic girl who does not know how to respect your betters. Do not ever show your face around us again until you learn your place." I stepped into the glass elevator and swiped my security badge. The doors glided shut, cutting off the signal and silencing the phone. When the doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into the sprawling, sunlit headquarters of my firm. My staff moved briskly around the open concept floor. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms straight into my corner office, tossing my phone onto the desk. Gwen walked in right behind me. She was holding a digital tablet and looked highly unamused. "Before we discuss the resort acquisition, you need to see this," she said. "It arrived via certified courier email 10 minutes ago." I took the tablet. It was a formal cease and desist letter from a law firm claiming to represent Julian Preston. The document demanded the immediate surrender of the diamond heirloom necklace, stating it was legally promised to Vanessa and that my retention of the jewelry constituted grand larceny. I read the letter twice. Something about it was glaringly wrong. The legal jargon was clumsy and repetitive. The formatting looked like a cheap template downloaded from a free legal website. The firm name at the top letterhead did not even have a registered corporate address in the state database. I handed the tablet back to Gwen. "Call Elias and get him in here right now," I said, "and bring me everything you can find on Julian Preston, not his curated social media profiles. I want public tax records, corporate registrations, property deeds, everything." 10 minutes later, Elias walked into my office. Elias was my lead financial attorney, a former federal prosecutor who had an uncanny ability to follow money through the darkest holes. He took a seat across from my desk, opening his laptop with a serious expression. "You asked for a deep dive on Julian Preston?" Elias said, adjusting his glasses. "I ran his name and his family's trust through our proprietary databases. Harper, you are not going to believe what I am looking at." "Tell me," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Elias turned his screen toward me. "Julian presents himself as a trust fund heir to the Preston real estate empire. He drives the luxury cars, wears the bespoke suits, talks about his family lineage. But the Preston family went completely bankrupt 4 years ago. His father made a series of catastrophic investments in commercial retail spaces just before the market shifted. They were completely liquidated. There is no trust fund. There is no old money estate. Julian has a net worth of less than 0. I stared at the screen, tracing the red lines of debt and foreclosure across his financial history. "Then how is he paying for his lifestyle?" I asked. "How is he affording a $200,000 wedding?" "He is not," Elias said grimly. I dug into his current corporate filings. Julian runs a boutique investment firm. He claims it is a private hedge fund for elite clients. He promises 30% annual returns through exclusive international real estate developments. But when you look at the corporate structure, it is a maze of shell companies. The money goes in from new investors, and it immediately gets wired offshore to the Cayman Islands. He uses the new investor money to pay small dividends to the older investors to keep them quiet, and he skims the rest to fund his lifestyle. A Ponzi scheme. I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme. Exactly. Elias nodded. And here is the worst part. Look at his client list. He is not targeting his old wealthy white country club friends. They all know his family went broke. They would never give him a dime. He is targeting affluent African American families, families who are new money or upper middle class, the ones who are desperate to break into the elite upper echelon. He uses his white privilege, his fake family legacy, and his tailored suits to make them feel like they are being granted access to a secret club. He preys entirely on their desire for status. My stomach twisted violently. He was targeting people exactly like my parents, people who were so blinded by the illusion of high society that they would hand over their life savings just to be invited to the table. Julian was not marrying Vanessa because he loved her. He was marrying her because her family was the perfect mark, and her network of ambitious social climbing friends was an untapped goldmine for his fraud. I need to know how deep my parents are in this, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Find out if Desmond and Clarice have transferred funds to his accounts. Elias typed rapidly for a few minutes. While he worked, I opened my personal phone and bypassed the angry texts to check Facebook. My mother was always eager to broadcast her financial moves to her friends. I scrolled down her page until I found a post from 2 days ago. It was a picture of my parents clinking champagne glasses with Julian on the patio of a high-end steakhouse. The caption read, "Celebrating a monumental family milestone today. Desmond and I just secured our future by becoming primary partners in Julian's International Development Fund. It feels wonderful to finally play in the big leagues. Generational wealth starts now." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I read the caption again. Primary partners. Harper, Elias said softly, breaking my concentration. I found it. I pulled the public property records for your parents' house in Atlanta. 2 weeks ago, they took out a massive secondary mortgage against the property. The house was fully paid off, but they leveraged it for $1.5 million. I also checked the SEC filings for Julian's fund. Your father's name is listed as a new major contributor. It looks like they liquidated their entire pension funds and handed over the mortgage cash directly to Julian's shell company. They gave him everything, I whispered, staring blindly at the wall. They handed a $1.5 million check to a con artist to pay for a wedding that was nothing but a prop for his scam. Elias closed his laptop. They are completely exposed, Harper. When this Ponzi scheme collapses, and they always do, the authorities will seize everything. Julian's accounts will be frozen. Your parents will be on the hook for a mortgage they cannot possibly pay. The bank will foreclose on their home. They will be entirely destitute. We could call the authorities right now. We could tip off the SEC. I sat in silence for a long time. The image of my mother sliding that behavioral contract across the cafe table flashed in my mind. The sound of my father threatening to cut me out of the will if I did not pay for Julian's alcohol echoed in my ears. They had willingly offered me up as a sacrificial lamb to this man. They had tried to strip me of my grandmother's necklace just to appease him. They were so desperate to be better than everyone else, so desperate to look down on me, that they willingly walked into a slaughterhouse. If we tip off the SEC now, the investigation will take months to become public, I said slowly. Julian will have time to shred documents. He will have time to flee the country with my parents' money. We cannot let him slip away quietly in the shadows. He wants to play the big shot in front of hundreds of people. We are going to give him exactly the audience he asked for. What are you thinking? Elias asked. Compile everything I instructed. I want bank statements. I want the mortgage transfer documents. I want the routing numbers showing the money moving to the Caymans. Package it all into a presentation format. I want it irrefutable and perfectly clear so that even a fool could understand it. Elias nodded, recognizing the tone in my voice. I will have my team work on it around the clock. As Elias left the office, Gwen stepped back in. She held a sleek silver folder in her hands. The acquisition of the Azure estate is moving faster than anticipated, she reported. Their current ownership is eager to liquidate. We should have the full transfer completed by Friday morning, well before the wedding rehearsal. Perfect, I said, leaning back in my chair. There is one more thing, Gwen added, her lips twitching into a small, predatory smile. The billing department at the resort just flagged a transaction. Julian Preston attempted to run the initial $50,000 deposit for the wedding catering and venue styling. And I asked? The credit card was declined, Gwen said. Insufficient funds. He tried 3 different cards. All of them bounced. The resort manager called him to explain the issue, and Julian claimed it was a simple bank error due to international fraud protection limits. He asked if they could force the approval through and promised to clear it up by tomorrow. The previous owners would have rejected it and canceled the event, but since we are taking over management, the billing department brought it directly to me. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the city traffic move far below. Julian was completely broke. He had drained my parents' money sent it offshore, and now he did not even have the credit limit to pay for the cocktail napkins at his own fake wedding. He was sweating right now. He was panicking, trying to keep his illusion alive for just a few more days until the wedding was over and he could disappear. Gwen waited patiently by the door. "Do you want me to have the manager cancel his reservation?" she asked. "We can shut the entire wedding down right now for non-payment." I turned my chair to face her, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "Absolutely not," I said. "Force the approval, override the system and mark his deposit as pending. Let him think he got away with it. Let him walk right into the trap. We are going to let them have their beautiful wedding at our beautiful resort." I was zipping up my leather carry-on bag when my personal phone began to ring. The screen flashed with a picture of my father. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the quiet hum of my penthouse apartment before I finally answered. I did not even get a chance to say hello before Desmond's voice boomed through the speaker. "Harper, I need you to wire $85,000 to my account right this second." It was not a request. It was a command delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who believed the world owed him unquestioning obedience. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "Why in the world would I do that, Dad?" He let out an exasperated sigh, the kind he used when I was a teenager asking too many questions. "Julian is having some minor international cash flow issues. His wealth manager is restructuring some overseas accounts to prepare for the wedding, and his assets are temporarily tied up in European markets. The resort is being completely unreasonable about the deposit. We just need you to cover this as a bridge loan. Julian will pay you back double after the honeymoon." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. International cash flow issues. That was a very elegant way of saying Julian's fraudulent credit cards had bounced across 3 different banking systems. "I thought Julian was a billionaire," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "Surely a billionaire can liquidate a fraction of a % of his portfolio to pay for his own wedding venue. Or better yet, why do you not use the $1.5 million you just pulled out of your house?" There was a sharp, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Harper," my father warned, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "Do not play smart with me. Julian's money is tied up making more money. That is how the elite operate. You would not understand because you are stuck in a middle management mindset. You are a stubborn, selfish girl who has always been jealous of your sister. Vanessa is marrying into a dynasty. You are sitting alone in an apartment. Now stop throwing a tantrum and wire the money. You owe this family." "I owe this family nothing," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You made your choice when you handed my college fund to a lawyer to keep Vanessa out of jail. You made your choice when you let Julian sit in a cafe and insult me to my face. I am not your bridge loan, Dad. I am not your backup plan. If you do not send this money—" Desmond yelled, the facade of the composed patriarch completely shattering. "I swear to you, Harper, I will make sure you are blacklisted from every family event for the rest of your life. You are a failure of a daughter. You have always been a disappointment." I pulled my suitcase toward the front door. "Have a beautiful wedding, Dad. Try the sliders. They are a specialty." I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I blocked my mother. I blocked Vanessa. I blocked Julian. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. 2 hours later, I was leaning back in a plush leather seat in the first-class cabin of a direct flight to Honolulu. A flight attendant handed me a glass of champagne and I clinked it against the rim of my laptop screen. I opened a secure messaging app and connected with Gwen. "Are we in control of the Azure estate?" I typed. Gwen replied instantly. The acquisition is finalized. The previous management company has handed over all operational software. We have full access to their internal systems, including security cameras, billing, and staff communications. Excellent, I replied. Vanessa has her final menu tasting scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon. I want you to call the resort manager. Inform him that because the groom's deposit was declined for insufficient funds, we must heavily modify the menu to match their actual budget, which is currently $0. What is the new menu? Gwen asked. Cancel the lobster tails. Cancel the Wagyu beef. Cancel the imported truffle risotto. Replace the entire spread with plain beef sliders, french fries, and tap water. Tell the manager to be extremely polite but absolutely firm. Company policy. I closed the laptop and took a sip of my champagne. The flight to Hawaii felt incredibly short. For the first time in my life, I was not carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations. I was not worried about whether my dress was too bright or my job was too corporate or my presence was too embarrassing for a fake white billionaire. I was just Harper, the woman who owned the ground they were standing on. By the time I landed in Waikiki and checked into my private oceanfront villa, the sun was beginning to set over the Pacific. I changed into a lightweight linen cover-up, poured myself a fresh drink, and sat on the lanai overlooking the crashing waves. My laptop pinged with an incoming video call from Gwen. You are going to want to see this, she said, her professional tone barely masking her amusement. I am patching you into the security feed from the Azure Estate's private dining room. The tasting happened an hour ago. The screen flickered, displaying a high-definition color security feed of a beautifully decorated tasting room. Vanessa was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, wearing a white silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. Julian was sitting next to her, looking pale and unusually sweaty. A man in a crisp suit, the resort manager, walked into the frame, followed by two waiters. They placed silver cloches on the table in front of Vanessa and Julian. We are so excited for the butter-poached lobster, Vanessa said, clapping her hands together like a spoiled child. And the truffle risotto. Julian's parents are flying in from Europe, so everything has to be absolutely 5-star. The manager offered a polite, practiced smile. I apologize, Miss Williams, but there has been a slight adjustment to your tasting menu today. He lifted the silver cloches. Underneath were 2 platefuls of greasy, uninspired beef sliders and a pile of basic French fries. Next to the plates, the waiter set down 2 glasses of plain tap water with no ice. Vanessa stared at the plates. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a solid 5 seconds. Then the eruption began. What is this? She shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the camera feed. Is this a joke? Are you people insane? I demanded lobster. I am marrying Julian Preston. Do you know who we are? We are elite clients. You are serving me fast food. I am incredibly sorry, Ma, the manager said, not looking sorry at all. However, our accounting department flagged Mr. Preston's deposit. The payment for $50,000 was declined due to insufficient funds. Until a valid payment method is provided, hotel policy dictates we can only offer our complimentary basic tier tasting. Vanessa whipped her head around to look at Julian. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. Insufficient funds. Julian, what is he talking about? Tell him to fix this right now. Tell him who your father is. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He tugged at the collar of his expensive shirt, his eyes darting toward the manager. It is just a bank error, babe. My wealth manager is moving assets from a Swiss account. The international wire triggers fraud alerts sometimes. It is just a routine audit by the SEC. Nothing to worry about. I will call my bank and have it cleared up in an hour. Vanessa stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You better fix it, she snapped at Julian. Then she turned her fury back on the manager, pointing a manicured finger in his face. You listen to me, you glorified waiter. My family is wealthy. My husband is old money. You do not humiliate me with cheap food. I want the general manager. I want the owner of this resort on the phone right now. I will have you fired. I will buy this place and tear it down just to ruin your life. I chuckled softly from my balcony in Hawaii. Oh, Vanessa, if you only knew. The manager simply bowed his head slightly. The owner is unavailable, ma'am, but we look forward to resolving your payment issues soon. Enjoy the sliders. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Vanessa screaming insults at the closed door. The camera feed showed Julian pulling out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He stepped away from Vanessa, pacing near the window. Gwen had managed to pull the audio isolation from the room microphone, and I could hear his panicked, hushed voice. "I need 100,000, Julian hissed into the phone. "Yes, today. I do not care about the interest rate. I do not care about the collateral. Just wire it to the resort's merchant account. If this wedding does not happen, the whole fund collapses. My investors are already asking questions. Just give me the money. I will pay you back triple when the new deposits clear." I leaned forward, my eyes glued to the screen. Julian was borrowing from loan sharks. He was taking predatory high-interest street money just to keep the illusion alive for a few more days. He was digging his own grave faster than I could have ever hoped. Gwen appeared back on the screen. "The loan shark money just hit the resort's account," she reported. $100,000 cleared and processed. "Keep it," I said. "Apply it to the outstanding balance and lock the account. Do not upgrade their menu. Do not change a single thing. Let them eat sliders at the reception." "What about your parents?" Gwen asked. I pulled up a separate screen showing my father's financial records. Desmond had taken the $1.5 million from his home equity line of credit and wired it to a corporate entity called Preston Global Holdings. That entity was registered to a mail drop in Delaware, and the money had already been dispersed into offshore accounts. "They are empty," I said, a strange mix of pity and profound satisfaction washing over me. My parents mortgaged their entire existence to buy a front-row seat to a disaster. Let them sit in it. The next few days in Hawaii were a masterclass in tranquility. I woke up early, drank fresh coffee while listening to the ocean, and swam in the crystal-clear water. I did not think about my mother's harsh words. I did not think about my father's threats. I was too busy coordinating the greatest financial and social demolition my family had ever seen. It was Thursday evening, the night before the wedding rehearsal. I was sitting at the massive teak dining table in my villa, surrounded by printed documents. I had everything Elias had compiled: the offshore bank routing numbers, the SEC investigation alerts, the foreclosure warnings from my parents' bank. And the most damning piece of all, a complete layout of Julian's Ponzi scheme proving he had stolen every dime my parents possessed. I took a sleek black USB drive and loaded every single file onto it. I also recorded a personal video looking directly into the camera, explaining exactly who owned the Azure estate and why their fancy white tablecloth wedding was about to serve them a heavy dose of reality. I placed the USB drive into a small velvet jewelry box. It was the exact same size and shape as the box that held my grandmother's diamond necklace. The necklace they had demanded I surrender. The necklace I was currently wearing around my own neck as I packed the box. I slid the velvet box into a heavy reinforced FedEx envelope. I printed out a shipping label with priority overnight delivery. The destination address was the Azure Estate Catering Office. The delivery instructions were very specific: to be hand-delivered to the bride at the VIP head table during the groom's speech. In the section for the sender's name, I did not write Harper. I took a thick black marker and wrote in large, unmistakable letters: "A final gift from your failure of a sister." I sealed the envelope, pressing the adhesive down firmly. I called the local courier service to come pick it up from my villa. As I handed the package to the driver, I felt the last invisible chain connecting me to my toxic family snap and break. I walked back out to the lanai, pouring myself a glass of vintage red wine. I looked out at the dark horizon where the ocean met the night sky. Tomorrow, my sister was going to put on a white dress. My parents were going to puff out their chests and pretend they were part of the elite. Julian was going to smile and lie through his teeth. And then they were all going to open my gift. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted absolutely perfect. The next morning, the sun rose over the Azure estate, casting a brilliant golden light across the manicured lawns and the sprawling vineyards that surrounded the main property. It was the absolute picture of perfection. The venue had been designed specifically for the elite to showcase their wealth and status to the world. 300 white wooden chairs were arranged in perfect symmetrical rows on the great lawn, facing a massive archway covered in thousands of imported white roses and orchids. The floral arrangements alone cost more than my parents' first house. A string quartet played softly in the background as the ocean breeze drifted through the trees. But as the guests began to arrive, the illusion of prestige immediately began to crack at the edges. Desmond and Clarice stood at the entrance to the reception tent, greeting the arrivals with stiff, rehearsed smiles that did not reach their eyes. Clarice was wearing a custom silk gown that pinched her waist, trying desperately to look like she belonged among the billionaires she was pretending to associate with. She eagerly greeted her friends from Atlanta. These were the women from her social clubs who had spent the last decade secretly competing with each other over whose children were more successful and whose homes were more expensively decorated. Clarice kissed their cheeks and accepted their compliments, soaking in the validation she craved more than oxygen. Then there were Julian's guests. They were a bizarre collection of people who looked exactly like they were cast for a television show about rich people. Men in tailored suits who checked their luxury watches too often, and women in oversized sunglasses who barely spoke to anyone around them. Julian had hired them. Elias had discovered that specific detail during his deep dive investigation. Julian actually paid out-of-work actors and minor social media influencers to attend his wedding to pad out the groom's side of the aisle, because his real family had completely cut him off years ago when his financial crimes first began to surface. They stood around sipping champagne and having incredibly hollow conversations about summering in the Hamptons and wintering in the Alps. It was a perfectly choreographed stage play. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch because the flowers, the music, and the venue fee had been paid for months in advance, long before Julian's accounts ran completely dry. But the reception was an entirely different story. When the 300 guests moved from the lawn into the massive glass-walled dining pavilion, they expected a 5-course meal featuring butter-poached lobster tail and Wagyu beef with truffle risotto. The tables were set with crystal glasses, gold-plated silverware, and silk napkins. Instead, the heavy kitchen doors swung open and the white-gloved waitstaff emerged carrying massive silver platters. They walked to the tables and lifted the lids. Piled high on the platters were plain, greasy beef sliders and small paper cups filled with lukewarm French fries. There was a collective gasp that rippled through the dining room. The contrast between the crystal chandeliers shining above and the cheap fast food sitting on the tables was staggering. The smell of fried grease began to mix with the expensive perfumes of the guests. People stared at their plates in absolute confusion. I watched all of this unfold in real time on my laptop screen from the comfort of my Hawaiian villa, thanks to the security cameras mounted in the high corners of the pavilion. I watched my mother scramble from table to table doing desperate damage control. Her face was flushed dark red beneath her heavy makeup as she laughed loudly, trying to convince her skeptical socialite friends that this was an intentional choice. "It is a new culinary trend from Europe," she lied smoothly, waving her hand over a plate of sliders. "It is called rustic chic minimalism." Julian and Vanessa wanted to subvert expectations and serve something nostalgic instead of the usual boring wedding food. "It is so avant-garde, do you not think?" Her friends just smiled politely and pushed the dry hamburger buns around their expensive china plates while casting judging glances at each other when my mother turned her back. When people inevitably asked where her eldest daughter was, Clarice did not miss a single beat. She leaned in close to her friends, lowering her voice to a dramatic stage whisper, ensuring everyone at the table could hear her tragic tale. Harper could not handle it. She sighed, shaking her head with fake pity. "You know how she is. She is 32 and completely alone." Seeing Vanessa marry into the Preston dynasty was simply too much for her fragile ego to bear. She refused to contribute to the wedding and decided to isolate herself out of pure jealousy. It is tragic, really, but we cannot let her bitter energy ruin Vanessa's special day. Some women are just destined to be miserable, and we have to love them from a distance. I sat on my balcony thousands of miles away, watching my mother assassinate my character to protect the facade of a man who was actively robbing her blind. While Clarice managed the social fallout, Julian was falling apart at the seams. He sat at the center of the lavish head table, sweating profusely in his custom tuxedo. He kept signaling the waitstaff for more champagne, downing glass after glass to steady his violently shaking hands. His eyes were not on his beautiful bride. His eyes kept darting nervously toward the entrance of the glass pavilion. Through the high-definition camera feed, I could clearly see what he was looking at. Standing just beyond the valet station near the edge of the property, shadows were three men in dark, unremarkable suits. They were not dressed for a wedding celebration. They had thick necks, flat expressions, and the quiet, menacing stillness of men who break legs for a living. The loan sharks had come to collect their money. They were standing there making sure Julian knew they were watching his every move, waiting patiently for the reception to end so they could have a private word with the groom. Julian wiped his forehead with a linen napkin, looking exactly like a man walking toward his own execution. Right next to him, Vanessa was living in an entirely different universe. She was completely oblivious to the tension radiating from her new husband, or the dangerous men waiting by the valet, or the fact that her guests were actively whispering about the terrible food. She had her phone mounted on a diamond-encrusted selfie stick, broadcasting live to her thousands of Instagram followers. She pouted her lips at the camera, showing off her heavy diamond ring while holding up a slider. "We are having the most amazing rustic chic reception, you guys," she cooed into the microphone. "Julian is just so creative and down to earth. He wanted us to stay grounded even though we are surrounded by absolute elite luxury." She panned the camera around the room carefully, avoiding the confused faces of her guests and focusing entirely on the floral centerpieces and the crystal glasses. She was so desperate for validation from strangers on the internet that she flatly refused to see the disaster unfolding right in front of her face. As the dinner service concluded, the music softened and the room grew quiet. It was time for the evening speeches. Desmond stood up first, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He tapped his champagne glass with a fork and beamed at the crowd. He gave a long, rambling speech about the joining of two great families. He talked about how proud he was of Vanessa for securing a future of generational wealth, and how the Preston name would elevate their lineage to heights they had always dreamed of. He practically bowed to Julian's hired fake relatives, thanking them for welcoming his daughter into their prestigious, exclusive circle. It was deeply embarrassing to watch my father, a man who used to have so much pride, humble himself before a room full of paid actors and a penniless con artist who had stolen his retirement fund. Then it was Julian's turn. He stood up, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. He swayed slightly, the heavy amounts of champagne clearly hitting his system. He forced a charismatic smile, playing the role of the wealthy heir one last time. "Thank you, Desmond," he said, his voice echoing through the silent pavilion. "Family is everything to the Prestons. We value loyalty, vision, and absolute class. Not everyone understands the heavy burden of greatness. Some people are content to live small lives, working meaningless corporate jobs and holding on to petty grudges because they lack the vision to see the bigger picture." Julian paused, looking out over the crowd. Those people with their small-minded vision will always be left behind in the dust while we build empires. He was talking directly about me. Even while his financial world was collapsing around him and loan sharks waited at the door, he could not resist taking a passive-aggressive shot at the sister-in-law who refused to bow to him. My parents smiled and nodded in agreement, completely missing the heavy irony of his words. Julian raised his glass, preparing to offer a final toast to his bride. "To my beautiful Vanessa," he began. But before he could finish the sentence, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the pavilion swung open with a loud thud. The resort manager walked in. He was not carrying a tray of food or a bottle of champagne. He was holding a sleek white and purple FedEx box. He walked with slow, deliberate purpose straight down the center aisle of the dining room, passing table after table of confused guests. The rhythmic tapping of his shoes against the hardwood floor echoed in the quiet room. The entire pavilion went dead silent watching this man interrupt the groom's grand speech. The manager reached the head table. He stepped up onto the raised platform and stood directly between Julian and Vanessa. He did not say a single word. He simply placed the FedEx box on the table right next to Vanessa's phone, which was still actively broadcasting live to thousands of people. Julian lowered his microphone, staring at the box in total confusion. He looked from the manager to the package. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly with panic. Vanessa looked down at the box and saw the large black letters written across the shipping label. Her eyes widened in surprise. She leaned closer, reading the words out loud for her followers to hear. "A final gift from your failure of a sister." A slow, wicked smile spread across Vanessa's perfectly contoured face. She looked at Julian and then looked directly into her phone camera, ensuring her audience captured every second of her triumph. "Oh my God, you guys!" She laughed, her voice dripping with toxic glee. "Harper actually sent something. She probably felt so guilty about missing the wedding of the decade that she bought me an apology gift. Let us see how sorry she really is." She reached out with her manicured hands and grabbed the edge of the cardboard flap, eagerly ripping the box open. I sat forward on my lounge chair, the warm Hawaiian breeze washing over me as I watched the screen intently. This was the exact moment I had meticulously planned for. Every insult they had hurled at me, every dollar they had stolen, every lie they had told to protect their fragile egos was about to culminate in this single action. I watched my sister tear away the cardboard, expecting to find the diamond necklace she felt entitled to. I watched my parents lean forward in their seats, expecting a surrender. I watched Julian wipe his brow, completely unaware that the floor was about to drop out from beneath him. I took a slow, steady breath, waiting for the show to begin. "Let us see how sorry I am, Vanessa. Open the box." The heavy cardboard of the FedEx box tore with a loud ripping sound under Vanessa's frantic, manicured fingers. She was breathing heavily, a manic smile plastered across her face as she dug through the packaging. Beside her, Julian was sweating through his bespoke tuxedo, his eyes darting toward the back of the pavilion, where the three men in dark suits still stood like statues. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, wiping his damp palms on his trousers. The 300 guests in the room sat in absolute silence. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The only sound was the rustle of packing paper. At the table closest to the front, Clarice leaned forward in her seat, gripping Desmond's arm. She looked incredibly smug, fully expecting to see me groveling, offering up my grandmother's diamonds as a desperate apology for missing the social event of the season. Vanessa pulled the heavy velvet box from the packaging. She held it up to her live stream camera, winking at her thousands of followers. "Moment of truth, you guys." She purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Let us see if my sister finally learned how to be a part of this family." She snapped the velvet lid open. Her smile instantly vanished. She stared down at the contents, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. She tilted the box, letting the light catch the object inside. It was not a cascade of brilliant diamonds. It was not a handwritten letter of apology. It was a sleek black iPad Pro resting snugly in a custom-cut foam insert. "What is this?" Vanessa muttered, poking at the screen with one long fingernail. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" The moment her finger made contact with the glass, the screen illuminated. It did not ask for a passcode. It did not open to a home screen. The device had been pre-programmed by my corporate IT department with a single highly aggressive execution script. The moment it woke up, it automatically synced with the Azure Estate's internal network, completely overriding the pavilion's master control system. All around the massive glass-walled room, the lights suddenly dimmed. The hidden motorized panels in the high ceiling beams slid open with a synchronized mechanical hum. 4 massive high-definition LED screens slowly descended into the room, forming a perfect square above the dance floor, ensuring that every single person in the venue had an unobstructed view. The state-of-the-art surround sound system, usually reserved for grand bridal entrances, cracked to life with a sharp burst of static. Julian took a step back, his face draining of all color. He looked up at the giant screens, a profound sense of dread washing over his features. Vanessa was still holding the iPad, staring at it as it mirrored the exact image now projecting above them. My face appeared on the massive screens 10 feet high and crystal clear. I was lounging on the lanai of my Hawaiian villa, the vibrant colors of the sunset reflecting off the ocean behind me. The ocean breeze gently moved my hair. I held a glass of vintage red wine in my hand, looking completely and utterly at peace. "Hello, family!" My pre-recorded voice boomed through the pavilion speakers, filling every corner of the silent room. "I hope you are all enjoying the reception. I am so sorry I could not be there to celebrate the merging of two such prestigious dynasties. But you know how it is. We single middle-class women who work 9-to-5 jobs are just so terribly busy with our small-minded vision." A ripple of shocked whispers swept through the room. Clarice's country club friends leaned in, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Desmond sat perfectly rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein throbbed in his neck. I took a slow sip of my wine on the screen. "I received your behavioral contract." I continued, my voice smooth and conversational. "I have to say I found the 5 conditions incredibly creative. Paying an $85,000 bar tab wearing a drab gray dress, so I would not outshine the bride handing over grandmother's diamonds, and of course remaining absolutely silent about my pathetic career so I would not embarrass Julian's elite relatives. It was a very compelling offer, but I decided to decline. I booked a first-class flight to Hawaii instead." Vanessa stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open. She looked down at her phone, which was still securely mounted on its stick, actively broadcasting this entire humiliation to her followers. The comment section on her live stream was moving so fast it was just a blur of text. "I hear the culinary experience tonight took a rather rustic turn," I said, resting my wine glass on the table beside me. "I really do hope everyone is enjoying the plain beef sliders and the tap water." I know Vanessa was looking forward to the butter-poached lobster and the imported truffle risotto. It is a shame, really. But you see, the resort catering department has a very strict policy against preparing premium seafood when the groom's credit card bounces for insufficient funds. The entire room gasped. It was not a polite, quiet sound. It was a loud, collective intake of breath from 300 people. The fake actors Julian had hired looked around in confusion, unsure if this was part of the script. Clarice's wealthy friends immediately began whispering behind their hands, staring directly at Julian with naked judgment. Julian's face turned violently red. He lunged forward, trying to grab the iPad out of Vanessa's hands. "Turn it off," he hissed, his voice frantic. "Shut the whole system down right now." Vanessa pulled away from him, her eyes locked on the giant screen above. Her chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. "Bounced," she whispered, staring at her new husband. "Your card bounced." I smiled warmly into the camera, ignoring the chaos I knew was unfolding in that room. Julian claimed it was an international cash flow issue. I continued, my voice echoing through the speakers. "A routine audit by the SEC. My father was even kind enough to call me this morning, ordering me to wire $85,000 to cover the gap. He called me a stubborn failure when I refused. He told me I owed this family." Desmond stood up from his table, his face a mask of absolute fury. He pointed at the nearest waiter. "Pull the plug on that screen," he shouted, his voice echoing across the room. "Cut the power to this building immediately." The waiter just stood there looking terrified, holding a silver tray of empty water glasses. No one moved to help him. My staff had been explicitly instructed to let the presentation play out to its completion under threat of immediate termination. "You do not owe anyone anything, Harper," a woman in the back of the room said loudly. I did not need to be there to know it was my Aunt Patricia, unable to resist adding to the drama. "But I am not entirely heartless," I said on the screen, folding my hands in my lap. "I did not want to leave my little sister completely empty-handed on her wedding day, so I decided to give you a gift after all. I want to officially welcome all of you to the Azure Estate. It really is a magnificent venue. The landscaping, the architecture, the sheer prestige. It is exactly the kind of place where the old money elite come to show off their wealth, which makes it the perfect addition to my corporate portfolio." The video of me sitting on the balcony smoothly shrank down into a small picture-in-picture box in the bottom corner of the screens. The main display was instantly replaced by a high-resolution scan of a legal document. It was the official property deed for the Azure estate. The text was large enough for everyone in the room to read clearly. It showed the full transfer of ownership from the previous management group directly to my private holding company, Harper Enterprise, LLC. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the room. Clarice had dropped her champagne glass. It smashed against the hardwood floor, sending sparkling shards scattering across the aisle. She stood there, staring up at the screen, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her face was entirely drained of color, making her heavy blush look like clown paint. The daughter she had spent 32 years belittling, the daughter she had tried to hide in a gray dress, the daughter she had called a pathetic, lonely failure, owned the multi-million-dollar resort where she was standing. "Oh my God!" One of Clarice's socialite friends gasped loudly, fanning herself with a linen napkin. "Clarice told us Harper was an entry-level secretary. She owns the whole resort," another woman whispered loudly. "She is a billionaire." Desmond stumbled backward, knocking his chair over. He looked from the screen to Clarice and then to Julian. His mind was struggling to process the impossible reality that his discarded child was vastly wealthier and more powerful than the man he had practically worshipped. Julian did not care about the deed to the resort. He was sweating so heavily his collar was soaked. He looked toward the back of the room. The three men in dark suits had taken 2 steps forward. They were no longer waiting patiently by the valet. They were standing inside the pavilion, blocking the main exit doors. Their eyes were locked directly on Julian. He was trapped. Vanessa was crying now, real ugly tears streaking her perfect makeup. She looked at Julian, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You said you were a billionaire, Julian. You said your family owned half of Manhattan. Why did your card bounce for sliders? Why does my sister own this venue?" Julian backed away from her, holding his hands up defensively. "It is a misunderstanding, Vanessa. She is lying. Your sister is faking these documents to ruin us. It is all a lie." "But wait, there is more," my voice echoed through the speakers, cutting through Julian's desperate pleading. "Let us talk about the Preston legacy. Let us talk about generational wealth and exclusive international development funds." The screens above the dance floor flashed, transitioning automatically to slide 2. The massive display was suddenly filled with a series of highly confidential banking documents. They were Julian's personal and corporate account statements, stripped of redactions and blown up for the entire world to see. I had highlighted the most important numbers in bright red. The balances were not in the millions. They were not even in the thousands. Every single account showed a negative balance. There were lists of outstanding personal loans, maxed-out credit cards, and notices of default from 3 different banks. At the very bottom of the screen, in massive bold text, was the official net worth of the Julian Preston Trust Fund, $0. "There is no Preston Empire," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute cold authority. "There is no trust fund. Julian Preston is completely, utterly bankrupt. He has been broke for 4 years." The pavilion erupted into absolute chaos. Guests were standing up, shouting over each other. The paid actors Julian had hired were quietly slipping out the side doors, realizing their paychecks were going to bounce. Clarice's friends were pulling out their phones, taking pictures of the screens above to send to everyone in their contact list. The social destruction was total and instantaneous. Vanessa dropped the iPad. It clattered against the table, but the screens above remained locked on Julian's disastrous financial records. She lunged at him, grabbing the lapels of his expensive tuxedo. "You lied to me," she screamed, shaking him. "You told me we were buying a villa in Tuscany. You told me we were flying private to the Maldives." Julian shoved her away, his eyes wild with panic. "Get off me!" he yelled. He looked toward the back doors where the 3 loan sharks were slowly walking down the center aisle, pushing past the panicking guests. They were coming for their $100,000, and Julian knew he did not have a single penny to his name. He turned and bolted. He scrambled off the raised platform, tripping over the edge of Vanessa's long white train. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the side exit of the glass pavilion, shoving a waiter out of his way. He burst through the double doors and disappeared into the manicured gardens, running for his life. Desmond grabbed his chest, his breathing ragged as he stared up at the screens. His eyes darted across the sea of negative numbers and banking alerts. He realized in that exact moment what he had done. He had taken a $1.5 million mortgage against his fully paid-off home. He had liquidated his entire life savings, and he had handed every single cent to a man who possessed nothing but a fake name and a rented tuxedo. "My money!" Desmond gasped, his voice a wet, choking sound. "He has my money!" I took another slow sip of my wine on the screen, watching the beautiful destruction unfold. I was completely unbothered. I had given them exactly what they asked for. They wanted discretion. I gave them total exposure. They wanted class. I gave them the ugly truth. They wanted me to blend into the background. Now I was the only thing they could see. I smiled, looking directly into the camera one last time. "Aloha, Vanessa," I said softly. "Enjoy the honeymoon." The screens went black. The audio cut out. The pavilion was plunged back into silence, broken only by the sound of my mother sobbing on the floor and my sister screaming Julian's name into the empty night air. But the silence did not last long. The heavy glass doors at the side of the pavilion burst open. Julian came stumbling backward into the room. He did not return voluntarily. One of the massive men in dark suits had grabbed him by the collar of his custom tuxedo and forcefully shoved him back onto the dance floor. Julian crashed to his hands and knees, sliding across the polished wood. The loan sharks stood blocking the exit, folding their massive arms across their chests. Julian was not going anywhere until his debts were paid. Absolute pandemonium broke out among the remaining guests. The paid actors Julian had hired to play his elite friends and business partners decided they had seen enough. They began sneaking out the back exits, grabbing handfuls of free champagne on their way out to compensate for the paychecks they knew they would never receive. Clarice's country club friends were practically tripping over their own designer gowns as they scrambled toward the valet station, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic embarrassment unfolding before them. Vanessa stood frozen in her pristine white dress, staring at Julian groveling on the floor. She snapped her head toward the resort manager, who was still standing calmly near the head table. "Turn it off," she screamed, pointing at the massive blank screens above them. "Cut the power to this building right now. I demand you cut the power." The manager simply folded his hands behind his back. "I am afraid I cannot do that, ma'am," he replied, his voice perfectly even. "The owner has explicitly instructed that the automated presentation must run its entire course. Any interference with the audiovisual equipment would be a breach of our management protocols." Vanessa stomped her foot, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "I will ruin you!" she shrieked. Before she could hurl another threat, the enormous LED screens above the dance floor flickered back to life. The black display was instantly replaced by a blinding white background. The digital guillotine was ready to drop its final blade. This was the kill shot I had prepared, the ultimate revelation that would burn their house of cards completely to the ground. The screen flashed with two side-by-side documents. On the left was the official $1.5 million secondary mortgage contract Desmond and Clarice had signed just 2 weeks prior. Their signatures were blown up to massive proportions, displayed clearly for everyone still in the room to read. On the right side of the screen was a detailed wire transfer receipt. It showed the exact amount of $1.5 million moving from my parents' local bank account directly into an offshore holding company controlled by Julian. But the presentation did not stop there. The screen animated drawing a thick red line from Julian's offshore account to a series of previous debts. The money had not been used to secure international real estate. It had not been invested in a luxury development fund. The transfer logs proved that Julian had immediately used my parents' retirement money to pay off a backlog of angry investors from his previous failed scams. He had used their money to quiet the people threatening to expose him, keeping his fake billionaire lifestyle afloat just long enough to trap Vanessa. Desmond stared up at the screens. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. His mouth opened and closed as he read the routing numbers and the transfer dates. The reality of his absolute financial ruin was projected 10 feet high above the heads of the people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. My retirement. Desmond whispered the words, barely making it past his lips. Then his voice grew louder, echoing through the chaotic pavilion. My retirement. Where is my money? He turned toward Julian, who was still scrambling to get his footing on the slippery dance floor. Desmond's eyes were wild with a level of rage and panic I had never seen before. All his arrogance, all his pompous pride, dissolved into pure frantic desperation. He lunged at his new son-in-law. Desmond grabbed Julian by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo, lifting the younger man halfway off the floor. "Give it back!" Desmond roared, shaking Julian violently. "You thief! You stole everything I worked for! Where is my money, Julian? Give me my money right now!" Julian panicked. He was trapped between the terrifying loan sharks at the exit and a furious, desperate father-in-law demanding millions of dollars he no longer possessed. The polished, charming persona of the elite trust fund heir completely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cornered rat. Julian planted his hands flat against Desmond's chest and shoved him with all his strength. "Get away from me!" Julian yelled. The force of the push caught Desmond off guard. He stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the polished wood. He fell hard, crashing onto the floor with a heavy thud. Clarice let out a piercing, hysterical scream, rushing to her husband's side. She dropped to her knees, clutching Desmond's arm while sobbing uncontrollably, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her face. Vanessa stood paralyzed, watching the man she thought would elevate her to high society shove her elderly father to the ground. Julian did not even look back at them. He scrambled toward the opposite side of the pavilion, desperately searching for a way out that was not blocked by men waiting to collect their debts. I watched the entire scene from my screen in Hawaii. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. They had willingly handed over their dignity and their life savings to a fraud, all because they were too blinded by greed and prejudice to see the truth. They had told me I was a failure because I worked for a living. They had demanded I shrink myself down so Vanessa could shine in a stolen spotlight. They had dug this grave with their own 2 hands. Up on the giant LED screens, the financial documents slowly faded away. The bright white background turned to a deep blood red. A final block of text appeared in large, crisp white letters. I read the words out loud to myself on the balcony, savoring the absolute finality of the message. "Mom, Dad, you threatened to kick me out of the family to save face. You told me I was a disappointment who did not know my place. Tragically, the bank will foreclose on your house this Monday morning. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags. Happy honeymoon." The red screen cast a harsh, glowing light over the remaining guests. Clarice looked up from the floor, reading the words through a veil of heavy tears. The realization that they were not just broke, but entirely homeless, hit her like a physical strike. She let out a long, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands, as the sheer magnitude of their ruin finally set in. Desmond sat on the floor, staring blankly at the red screen. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, his entire world completely annihilated in the span of 20 minutes. He had threatened to cut me out of his will to force my obedience. Now his will was worth absolutely nothing. He had no legacy left to leave. Outside the glass walls of the pavilion, a new sound began to cut through the heavy tropical night air. It started as a faint wail in the distance, growing steadily louder and more urgent. The piercing shriek of police sirens cut through the quiet resort property. The red and blue flashing lights reflected against the tall palm trees, illuminating the manicured gardens in a frantic strobe effect. Elias had done his job perfectly. The moment the loan shark money hit the resort accounts, he had forwarded the entire meticulously compiled dossier of Julian's fraudulent transfers straight to the federal authorities. He had handed them a perfectly wrapped criminal case, complete with wire fraud, grand larceny, and an active location for the suspect. The police were not just coming to ask questions, they were coming to make an arrest. Julian heard the sirens. He froze in the middle of the room, looking wildly toward the front entrance. The three loan sharks immediately turned and melted away into the shadows, disappearing before the authorities could arrive. Julian was entirely alone. Vanessa finally found her voice. She looked at Julian, her tear-stained face twisted with a mixture of hatred and absolute despair. "You ruined my life!" she screamed at him, taking a step forward. "You ruined everything. I am supposed to be a billionaire's wife." Julian backed away from her, his hands raised in surrender. The flashing police lights were now visible through the glass walls, painting his terrified face in alternating shades of red and blue. I reached out and gently closed my laptop screen, shutting off the camera feed. The sound of the screaming, the sirens, and the shattered glass vanished instantly, leaving me in the peaceful quiet of the Hawaiian night. The ocean waves rolled rhythmically against the shore below my villa, a steady, calming sound that washed away the last traces of the family I used to know. I leaned back in my lounge chair and looked up at the stars. I had spent my entire life being told I was not good enough. I had spent years quietly building an empire while they loudly celebrated mediocrity. They had demanded my silence and my submission. Instead, I gave them the truth. The behavioral contract was shredded. The heirlooms were safe. The resort belonged to me. I took another sip of my vintage wine, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue. I was Harper. I was 32 years old, and I had never felt more alive. I had barely set my wine glass down on the smooth glass table when my personal phone vibrated. It was a text message from Gwen. "Turn the camera feed back on right now," the message read. "You are going to want to see the grand finale." I smiled, a genuine feeling of profound warmth spreading through my chest as I opened my laptop and reconnected to the secure server. The digital feed from the pavilion flickered back to life, and the scene playing out on my screen was nothing short of cinematic perfection. The faint wail of sirens I had heard moments ago had transformed into a deafening, terrifying roar. The entire front lawn of the Azure estate was illuminated by a blinding storm of red and blue flashing lights. Half a dozen police cruisers and unmarked black SUVs had torn up the long circular driveway, their tires tearing through the meticulously manicured grass to park at jagged, aggressive angles. Men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with large yellow letters spelling out FBI and state police poured out of the vehicles. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, swarming the perimeter of the property and flooding through the main entrance. Julian was sprinting blindly through the resort's famous rose garden. He had torn off his suit jacket and was scrambling over the low hedges, his white dress shirt glowing under the harsh glare of the security lights. He looked like a panicked, hunted animal, entirely stripped of his arrogant old money facade. He did not make it very far. As he rounded the corner of the large stone fountain, looking wildly for an exit, he ran directly into a solid wall of tactical vests. 4 federal agents tackled him simultaneously. The impact sent Julian crashing hard into the dirt right in the middle of a massive bed of imported white orchids. I turned up the audio feed on my laptop just in time to hear the sharp, distinct metallic click of steel bracelets locking around Julian's wrists. The agents dragged him roughly to his feet. His custom tuxedo shirt was ripped at the collar and covered in dark, wet mud. His face was scraped and bleeding from where it had hit the decorative stones. Julian Preston, one of the federal agents, shouted, his authoritative voice echoing clearly across the chaotic lawn. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate grand larceny, and multiple counts of investor fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Julian was sobbing. The man who had sat in a luxury cafe and mocked me for working a normal job, the man who had claimed my middle-class mindset was a disease, was now weeping openly. He begged the agents to let him go, promising he could get the money, swearing it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He looked completely pathetic, a hollow shell of a man whose entire existence was built on lies. Inside the glass pavilion, the situation had deteriorated into absolute madness. Vanessa, realizing that her billionaire groom was currently being dragged through the mud in handcuffs, completely lost her mind. She gathered the heavy folds of her $15,000 silk wedding gown and sprinted out of the pavilion doors. She did not care about elegance or high society grace anymore. She tripped over the edge of her massive train and went sprawling forward, landing hard on her hands and knees in the damp soil next to the valet station. The pristine white silk of her dress absorbed the dark mud and spilled red wine that had been dropped by fleeing guests. She stayed on her knees in the dirt, her hands clutching her ruined dress, screaming Julian's name in a voice so shrill and desperate it cut right through the sound of the police radios. Back in the dining room, Clarice was witnessing the complete and total evaporation of her entire social standing. Her wealthy country club friends, the women she had spent decades trying to impress, were not running to comfort her. They were actively backing away from her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Clarice looked out the glass walls, seeing her daughter weeping in the mud and her fraudulent son-in-law being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. The sheer magnitude of the public humiliation was too much for her fragile, ego-driven heart to bear. She let out a short, high-pitched gasp, clutched her chest with both hands, and collapsed. She fainted dead away, her body hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud. Desmond tried to catch her, but he was too slow. He fell to his knees beside his unconscious wife, patting her cheek and looking around wildly for help. But no help was coming. The 300 guests in the room were not looking at them with sympathy. Every single person had their mobile phone out. The pavilion was a sea of glowing screens. The socialites, the fake actors, the extended family, they were all recording the collapse of the fake Preston empire. The very same people Clarice had invited to witness her triumph were now live streaming her ultimate demise. Through the crowd of whispering recording guests, the resort manager walked with purposeful, measured steps. He was holding a crisp white clipboard, and his expression was completely devoid of any emotion. He stepped over a shattered champagne flute and stopped right in front of Desmond, who was still kneeling beside my mother, as she began to flutter her eyes open. Desmond looked up at the manager, his face pale and desperate. "Help us," Desmond pleaded, his voice trembling. "Call an ambulance. Call a lawyer. My daughter's husband is being kidnapped by the police." The manager did not reach for his radio. Instead, he pulled a single sheet of paper from his clipboard and held it out. Desmond stared at it, too shocked to take it from the man's hand. "What is this?" he rasped. "This is your official cancellation of contract," the manager said, his voice loud enough to be captured by the dozens of cell phones recording the scene. "The credit card fraud committed by your son-in-law violates our strict terms of service. Furthermore, as the event has been deemed an active crime scene by federal authorities, your reservation is entirely void. You are to vacate my boss's property in exactly 15 minutes, or you will be placed in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespassing." Desmond's jaw dropped. "Vacate. We paid for this venue. My daughter is out there in the dirt. My wife just collapsed. You cannot kick us out. We are elite guests." The manager did not flinch. "You are not elite guests, sir. You are trespassers who have attempted to defraud this establishment. You have 14 minutes left. I suggest you gather your family and walk to the street." Clarice, who had regained consciousness just in time to hear the manager's ultimatum, let out a fresh wail of despair. She leaned heavily on Desmond as he pulled her up from the floor. Her custom silk gown was wrinkled, her perfect hair was unspooling, and her heavy makeup was running down her face in dark, tear-stained tracks. They limped toward the exit of the glass pavilion, a defeated, broken couple running a gauntlet of their former friends. Not a single person offered them a ride. Not a single person offered a word of comfort. The social climbers they had tried so hard to impress simply turned their backs and continued recording. Desmond and Clarice stumbled out onto the main lawn, where the flashing police lights cast long, erratic shadows. They found Vanessa still sitting in the dirt near the valet station. Her beautiful white veil was tangled in a thorny rosebush, and the bottom half of her gown was completely ruined, stained brown and black from the mud. She was staring blankly at the spot where the federal vehicles had just driven away, taking her fake billionaire husband with them. Desmond grabbed Vanessa by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. "We have to go," he muttered, his voice devoid of any warmth or fatherly affection. "We have to leave right now." Vanessa tried to fight him, crying that she needed to wait for Julian, that it was all a terrible mistake, but Desmond pulled her forward with brute force. They walked down the long, sweeping driveway of the Azure estate, the very driveway they had driven up in a rented luxury limousine just hours earlier, feeling like absolute royalty. Now they were walking down it on foot, dragging their ruined formal wear across the asphalt, while the resort security guards followed closely behind them, ensuring they left the premises without incident. They reached the massive iron gates at the entrance of the property. The security guards closed the heavy gates behind them with a loud metallic clang, locking them out in the dark tropical night. They stood on the concrete curb beside a busy public highway. Cars drove past their headlights, illuminating the pathetic scene. Clarice was shivering, wrapping her arms around herself as the reality of her shattered social life set in. Desmond was staring at his hands, muttering over and over about his lost retirement, his lost house, his lost life. He realized with crushing, suffocating clarity that they had absolutely nowhere to go. Their bank accounts were empty. Their beautiful home in Atlanta was actively entering foreclosure. They could not even afford to call a taxi to take them back to their hotel. They were utterly destitute. Vanessa sat down on the hard concrete curb, the rough surface catching and tearing the delicate silk of her dress. The reality of her situation was finally breaching the walls of her delusion. She was not a billionaire's wife. She was not entering high society. She was a broke, publicly humiliated woman, sitting in the dirt on the side of a highway, married to a federal criminal. She pulled her phone from her small bridle clutch. Her hands were shaking violently as she scrolled through her contacts. She bypassed her friends who she knew had just watched her destruction live on the internet. She bypassed her new husband's fake family. She bypassed the people she used to look down on. I sat on my balcony in Hawaii, the warm night air brushing against my skin, watching the stars reflect on the dark, peaceful ocean. My phone, which had been silent for hours, suddenly lit up and began to vibrate against the glass table. I looked down at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed brightly in the darkness. It was Vanessa. I let the phone vibrate against the glass table for a few long moments, simply watching my sister's name illuminate the dark screen. The warm Hawaiian breeze gently rustled the palm leaves around my balcony. The ocean waves continued their steady rhythmic crash against the shore below. It was a perfectly peaceful evening, completely untouched by the absolute catastrophe unfolding thousands of miles away. I picked up the sleek device, swiping my thumb across the screen to accept the call, and slowly brought it to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply listened to the chaos. "Harper! Oh my God! Harper, please tell me you are there!" Vanessa screamed through the speaker. Her voice was a jagged, hysterical mess, completely stripped of the sweet, condescending tone she had used her entire life. The loud rush of highway traffic roared in the background, mixing with the unmistakable sound of our mother weeping uncontrollably. "You have to help us, Harper. You have to fix this right now." They took Julian. The federal agents put him in handcuffs and dragged him away like a criminal, and the resort manager threw us out into the street. We are standing on the side of a highway in the dark, and Mom is having a panic attack. I leaned back in my lounge chair, resting my bare feet on the railing. I swirled the dark vintage red wine in my glass, watching the liquid coat the crystal sides. I let her panic breathe in the silence between us, refusing to offer a single word of comfort. "Are you listening to me?" Vanessa shrieked, her desperation rapidly shifting back into her familiar toxic entitlement. "You own that entire resort. You are literally a billionaire, Harper. You have the money to make all of this go away. You have to call your bank and wire us the funds right now. We need to post bail for Julian before they put him in a real cell, and you have to pay off Mom and Dad's mortgage before the bank takes their house on Monday. You are rich, Harper. You have more money than all of us combined. Save us." She was panting into the receiver, completely out of breath. Even now, standing in the dirt in a ruined wedding dress with a fraudulent husband in federal custody, she still believed my entire existence was meant to serve her. She honestly believed she could snap her fingers and demand my wealth to clean up her catastrophic mistakes. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. The flavor was deep and complex, resting perfectly on my tongue. "I would love to help you, Vanessa. I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. But unfortunately, my hands are tied by a very strict legal document. What are you talking about? Vanessa sobbed, her voice cracking. What document? The behavioral contract you sent me last month, I replied, keeping my tone incredibly polite. I am simply following the rules you outlined for me to be a part of your perfect life. Specifically, condition number 3. I believe it stated that I must never mention my career, my finances, or my personal wealth to anyone, so as not to embarrass Julian or outshine your special day. If I were to use my billions to bail out your fake husband, I would be violating your very specific terms and conditions. I am just following your rules, Vanessa. You wanted me to remain a quiet, insignificant failure. Harper, please stop doing this! Vanessa cried, the sound of passing cars drowning out her sobs for a brief second. I am sorry, okay? I am sorry about the contract. Just send the money. Dad is losing his mind out here. And that brings me to my second point. I continued, completely ignoring her apology. Desmond made it very clear in his voicemail this morning that if I did not drain my own savings to pay for your alcohol tab, I was officially cut out of the will and kicked out of the family. He told me I was a disappointment who did not belong with the elite. So technically speaking, we are not even family anymore. I have no obligation to help a group of strangers standing on the side of a road. There was a sudden scuffling sound on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp gasp from Vanessa. The phone had been ripped from her hands. Harper, you listen to me right now! Desmond's voice boomed through the speaker. His tone was rough and shaking, but he was desperately trying to force his old patriarchal authority back into his words. He was trying to command me like he used to when I was a child. You will contact your financial department immediately. You will wire $1.5 million to my account so I can stop the foreclosure on this house, and then you will secure the best defense attorney in Manhattan for Julian. You owe this to us, Harper. We raised you. We fed you. You will do as you are told. The sheer audacity of his demands was almost breathtaking. He had mortgaged his entire life to impress a man who treated him like garbage, and now he expected the daughter he had thrown away to buy his life back. Dad, I said, my voice dropping an octave, the polite conversational tone vanishing entirely. Let us be very clear about what just happened tonight. You did not make a mistake. You made a choice. You willingly gambled your entire life, your home, your retirement, and your dignity on a white con artist just so you could look rich to people who do not even care about you. You chose a fake elite lifestyle over your own flesh and blood. You wanted to play in the big leagues, Desmond. Well, this is what it costs. Time to pay the tab. Harper, do not you dare hang up this phone, Desmond yelled, his voice cracking with pure terror as the reality of my words hit him. Harper. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button ending the call. The silence of the Hawaiian night rushed back in replacing the frantic, miserable demands of my former family. I did not just block their numbers. I popped the protective case off the back of the phone and used the edge of my earring to press the tiny release button on the side. The small plastic tray popped out. I pulled the SIM card free, snapping the tiny piece of plastic cleanly in half between my thumb and forefinger. I walked over to the small wastebasket near the sliding glass doors and tossed the broken pieces inside. They would never reach me on that number again. They would never reach me on any number ever again. The ties were permanently severed. I walked back to my lounge chair, picked up my wine glass, and looked back out at the horizon, feeling a profound, absolute sense of freedom. Thousands of miles away in a sterile, brightly lit federal interrogation room, Julian was breaking down. He sat handcuffed to a heavy metal table, shivering in his ruined, muddy tuxedo shirt. The smooth, charismatic billionaire air was completely gone. In his place sat a terrified, penniless fraud facing decades in a federal penitentiary. 2 FBI agents stood on the opposite side of the table, dropping thick manila folders full of financial records in front of him. The documents detailed every single wire transfer, every fake corporate shell company, and every illegal transaction Julian had made over the last 4 years, including the massive injection of cash from Desmond's stolen retirement fund. Where is the money? Julian, the lead agent, asked, leaning over the table. You moved $1.5 million offshore yesterday morning. Where is it now? Julian put his face in his handcuffed hands, sobbing so hard his shoulders shook violently. It is gone. He wept, his voice muffled and pathetic. It is all gone. The agents exchanged a tired look. $1.5 million does not just vanish in 24 hours, Julian. Where did you hide it? I did not hide it, Julian cried, lifting his tear-streaked face to look at them. I owed people. Dangerous people. The men at the wedding, they were going to kill me. I had to pay them back. And the rest of it went to the private jet companies. It went to the fake relatives. It went to the lifestyle management firms. I had to keep up appearances. I had to make them believe I was rich so they would keep investing. I spent it all. There are no assets left. There is no trust fund. There is nothing. The FBI agents stared at him in quiet disgust. Julian had successfully defrauded millions of dollars from desperate social climbers, and he had blown every single cent of it on rented luxury cars, fake social media influence, and expensive champagne. He had built a massive glittering empire out of absolute thin air, and now the wind had completely blown it away. He was going to federal prison, and he was going there completely broke. Back in front of the Azure estate, the flashing lights of the police cars had long since faded into the distance. The heavy iron gates of the resort remained firmly locked. The highway was dark and cold, the ocean breeze whipping off the coast, cutting right through the thin material of their formal clothes. Desmond stood perfectly still, clutching his dead cell phone in his hand. The call had dropped, and when he tried to dial back, a harsh automated voice informed him the number was no longer in service. Harper was gone. The money was gone. Julian was gone. Clarice was sitting on the concrete curb next to Vanessa, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest to stop the shivering. Her expensive silk gown was torn, and stained, her heels tossed carelessly into the grass beside her. She looked up at her husband, her eyes wide and bloodshot, her face streaked with ruined mascara. Desmond, she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. What are we going to do? The bank, the mortgage. Where are we going to live, Desmond? Desmond looked down at his wife and his golden child sitting in the dirt on the side of a public road. He thought about his beautiful home in Atlanta, the one he had owned free and clear just a few weeks ago. He thought about his comfortable retirement accounts, the ones he had drained to satisfy a fraud. He thought about the daughter he had alienated and cast aside to protect his own pathetic pride. He slowly lowered himself onto the cold concrete curb, sitting right beside them in the dark. He buried his face in his hands, the harsh reality crushing the last remaining breath of his ego. We have nothing. Clarice, he said, his voice a broken, hollow whisper. We have absolutely nothing left. The three of them sat there on the side of the highway, shivering in their ruined designer clothes, completely alone in the dark, as the cars rushed by without stopping. The grand elite dynasty they had tried so desperately to build had collapsed directly on top of them, leaving them buried under the weight of their own terrible choices. 1 month later, the harsh reality of their situation had settled over them like a thick, suffocating blanket. The luxurious, sprawling mansion in Atlanta, with its imported crystal chandeliers and perfectly manicured lawns, was nothing more than a painful ghost. In its place was room 114 at a discount motel situated right next to a noisy interstate highway. The carpet beneath their feet was a suspicious shade of brown that smelled faintly of old cigarette smoke and cheap industrial bleach. The wall-mounted air conditioning unit rattled violently, struggling to combat the oppressive, humid summer heat that seeped through the poorly insulated window. There was one small television bolted to the wall and 2 sagging double beds covered in thin, scratchy blankets. It was a spectacular fall from grace, a brutal physical manifestation of their absolute financial ruin. Vanessa sat on the edge of the mattress, staring blankly at her cracked phone screen. She was no longer wearing $15,000 silk gowns or flashing expensive diamond rings. She was wearing cheap, faded sweatpants, her hair pulled back into a messy, greasy knot. Her social media empire, the one she had built entirely on the illusion of elite wealth and high society connections, had turned into a digital firing squad. Her hundreds of thousands of followers had watched the live stream of her new husband being dragged away in handcuffs. The internet does not forget, and it certainly does not forgive. Thousands of comments flooded her pages every single hour. People were tearing her apart, calling her a fraud, a gold digger, and a pathetic accomplice to a criminal. The luxury brands that had once sent her free merchandise publicly severed ties, issuing statements that they did not associate with federal criminals. But the social destruction was the least of her problems. The federal investigators had executed search warrants and found the signature of Vanessa on several documents Julian had used to set up his dummy corporations. She had signed them blindly, eager to be a corporate officer in his fake elite empire without ever reading the fine print. Now the authorities were looking at her as a potential accessory to federal wire fraud. Her defense attorney had dropped her case 3 days ago when her retainer fee bounced. She jumped every time a police siren wailed in the distance, terrified that federal agents were coming to put her in handcuffs too. The stress of extreme poverty and public humiliation acted like a match thrown into a powder keg. The toxic loyalty that had once bound my family together completely disintegrated. They turned on each other with a viciousness that was genuinely terrifying to witness. Clarice paced the narrow strip of stained carpet between the two beds, her hands trembling as she glared at her golden child. "This is your fault!" Clarice screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vanessa. "You brought that absolute monster into our home. You told us he was a billionaire trust fund heir. You begged your father to invest in his fake development fund so you could have a larger wedding and a more expensive lifestyle. You destroyed this family, Vanessa. You destroyed everything we worked for." Vanessa threw her phone onto the cheap bedspread, standing up to face our mother. Her eyes were wild and bloodshot from weeks of crying and lack of sleep. "Do not you dare put this on me, Vanessa!" yelled back her voice, echoing off the thin motel walls. "You are the adults. You are supposed to be smart and responsible. You mortgaged the house without even running a background check because you were so desperate to brag to your country club friends. You handed him $1.5 million because you wanted to buy your way into high society. You were just as greedy and pathetic as he was." Desmond sat in the single plastic chair by the window, staring out at the bleak asphalt parking lot. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 4 weeks. He did not intervene in the screaming match happening inches away from him. He had nothing left to say. His legendary pride, his absolute authority, his arrogant demands were all completely gone. He had spent the last 30 days desperately trying to find a legal loophole to save his home and his retirement. He had swallowed his remaining pride and walked into the office of the most ruthless litigation attorney in Atlanta, begging for salvation. He had slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, demanding the lawyer sue the bank, sue Julian, and sue the resort management. The lawyer had looked at Desmond with cold, clinical pity. He had reviewed the mortgage documents, the wire transfers, and the bank statements with brutal efficiency. "There is no case," Desmond, the lawyer, had told him flatly. "You were not held at gunpoint. You were not legally declared mentally incompetent. You walked into a bank as a consenting adult and signed a secondary mortgage of your own free will. You voluntarily wired the funds to an offshore account. The fact that your son-in-law lied to you does not invalidate your legal obligation to the bank. The money is gone, untraceable and completely unrecoverable. You have no legal recourse." The bank had moved with ruthless efficiency. Since Desmond had defaulted on the very first payment, the foreclosure process was expedited with terrifying speed. The eviction notice was taped to the heavy oak front door of their beloved mansion just 3 weeks after the wedding disaster. They were given exactly 48 hours to pack whatever personal belongings they could fit into the mid-sized sedan Desmond drove. They had watched from the driveway as the bank representatives arrived to change the locks and padlock the custom iron gates. Clarice had tried to take the imported silk curtains and the crystal wall sconces, but the bank agent had threatened to call the police. Everything they had left behind, the antique furniture, the curated artwork, the expensive china, it all belonged to the bank now. The neighbors they had always looked down upon watched from their windows as my parents loaded trash bags full of clothes into their car. In their absolute darkest hour, they finally realized what they had thrown away. They realized that the daughter they had called a failure, the daughter they had hidden in the shadows, was their only salvation. I was a billionaire. I owned the resort where they were humiliated. I had the power to wipe away their massive debt with a single effortless phone call. But they could not reach me. Desmond had tried calling my personal number hundreds of times. He only ever received a sterile, disconnected dial tone. He had tried emailing my old corporate address, but the messages bounced back immediately with undeliverable error codes. In a final act of utter desperation, he had driven to the regional headquarters of my firm, demanding to speak with me. He had walked into the lobby expecting his old patriarchal authority to grant him access. My security team had met him at the front desk. They did not raise their voices or cause a scene. They simply informed him that Harper Enterprise LLC had no record of an appointment for him. They escorted him out of the building, threatening immediate police action if he returned to the premises. I was a ghost, a very wealthy, untouchable ghost who had completely vanished from their world, which brought them to this specific Friday morning in the cramped motel room. Desmond was staring at the cracked screen of his laptop resting on the small laminate desk. The bank was auctioning off the mansion today. They were selling it fast to recoup whatever losses they could from the defaulted mortgage. Desmond watched the digital auction site refreshing the page every few seconds. He harbored a pathetic, desperate hope that maybe the house would not sell. Maybe the bank would give him more time. Maybe a miracle would happen and he could somehow find the money to reclaim his kingdom. The starting bid was painfully low. It was literal pennies on the dollar compared to what the sprawling estate was actually worth. Desmond watched as the first bid registered on the screen. Then another. Then a third. The numbers climbed slowly, but they were still insultingly low. Clarice stopped pacing and stood behind him staring at the screen with tear-filled eyes. "That is our home," she whispered, her voice cracking with despair. "They are giving it away. They are giving away my beautiful home to strangers." Suddenly, a new bidder entered the digital fray. The anonymous username flashed on the screen, submitting a bid that completely crushed the competition. It was an overwhelming cash offer that shut down the auction in seconds. The system registered the massive bid and immediately locked out all other participants. The screen flashed bright green with the word "sold." Desmond slammed his laptop shut, burying his face in his hands. He let out a broken, ragged sob. He did not know who had just purchased his legacy. He did not know who held the keys to the kingdom he had spent 30 years building. But I knew. I sat in my corner office thousands of miles away, staring at the exact same digital auction screen. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, smiling as the official confirmation email landed in my secure inbox. The holding company that had just purchased the estate for an absolute steal was a small anonymous subsidiary firm, a firm completely owned and operated by me. I was the new owner of the house they had threatened to kick me out of. I was the landlord of the property where I had spent my childhood, being told I was a disappointment. I pulled up the property management file on my computer and typed out a set of very specific instructions for the real estate agent. The house was to be completely gutted. The ridiculous imported chandeliers, the gaudy wallpaper, the pretentious country club decor, it was all going in a dumpster. I was going to renovate the entire property and turn it into a shelter for young women who needed a safe place to build their own independent lives. Women who needed to know that their worth was not defined by their obedience to toxic family members. I closed the file and looked out my office window at the bustling city below. The storm had finally passed. The house of cards had completely collapsed, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. They had played their game of manipulation and greed, and they had lost everything. I had played my game of silence and strategy, and I had won the world. The crisp autumn air of Atlanta whipped around me as I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of my corporate headquarters. It had been several weeks since the auction, and my life had settled into a beautiful, productive rhythm. I was flanked by two members of my personal security team, their presence a quiet comfort as we made our way toward my waiting car. I was reviewing the quarterly projections in my head, entirely focused on the future, when a sudden frantic movement caught my eye. A woman lunged out from behind a concrete planter near the edge of the private courtyard. She was moving with a desperate, erratic energy that immediately put my security team on high alert. One of the guards stepped smoothly in front of me, raising a hand to block her path. It took me a full 3 seconds to recognize the haggard, desperate woman trying to push past the guard. It was Clarice. My mother looked absolutely unrecognizable. The perfectly tailored designer suits and immaculate hair that had once defined her entire existence were gone. She was wearing a faded trench coat over wrinkled clothes, her face pale and heavily lined with stress. The elite country club matriarch had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a woman. She crashed against the solid chest of my security guard, weeping openly and clawing at his suit jacket. "Harper, please!" she sobbed, her voice cracking as she stared at me through the barrier of security. "Harper, you have to talk to me. You have to listen to me. I know you bought the house. I know it was you." I stopped walking. I did not feel the familiar spike of anxiety that usually accompanied her presence. I did not feel anger or resentment or even pity. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an unwelcome burden, and I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional cord that had bound me to her toxic approval was completely severed. I gestured for my guard to give her a few inches of space, but I did not step any closer. "Please, Harper," my mother wailed, falling to her knees on the cold concrete pavement. "We have nowhere to go. Desmond is driving a delivery truck, and Vanessa will not even speak to us. We are living in a filthy motel. You have your revenge now, please, just let us go home. Let us back into the house. It is my home, Harper. It is my sanctuary. You have billions of dollars, you do not need it. Just give it back to us, and we can be a real family again. I promise I will be a better mother. I promise." She was playing the ultimate victim, weaponizing her tears, just like she had done my entire life. She was expecting me to fold under the weight of maternal guilt, to rush forward and pull her up from the pavement and hand her the keys to her kingdom. But the girl who would have done that was long gone. I looked down at her, my expression completely neutral. "You cannot go back to that house, Clarice," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Why?" she gasped, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "I will pay you rent, Harper. I will clean it myself. Just please let me go home." "Because the house does not exist anymore," I replied calmly. The demolition crews arrived at 6:00 this morning. They took down the crystal chandeliers and bulldozed the marble columns. The entire property was leveled to the ground. Clarice stopped breathing. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as the blood completely drained from her face. "What did you do?" she whispered in absolute horror. "I rezoned the property," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "The land is being paved over this week. We are building a massive commercial parking lot to service the new shopping district. There is no sanctuary left for you to return to. Your toxic favoritism and your desperate greed burned your kingdom to the ground long before the bulldozers arrived." A guttural, agonizing wail tore from my mother's throat. She collapsed completely onto the pavement, clutching her stomach as she sobbed for the loss of her physical wealth. She was not crying for the daughter she had alienated. She was not crying for the family she had destroyed. She was crying for the bricks and the mortar and the illusion of status that she would never ever get back. I turned away from her and walked toward my waiting car. My security team followed closely behind, leaving Clarice sobbing alone on the pristine concrete of my corporate plaza. As the car door closed, shielding me from the sound of her weeping, I felt a profound sense of realization wash over me. For years, I had believed that forgiveness meant allowing toxic people back into your life to prove you were the bigger person. I thought it meant waiting for an apology that was never going to come. But walking away from my mother on that pavement, I finally understood the truth. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It simply means letting go of the desperate hope that they will ever change. It means accepting them for exactly who they are and choosing to protect your own peace anyway. I was free. 3 weeks later, the final chapter of their manufactured tragedy played out in a crowded federal courtroom in New York. Julian sat at the defense table wearing a shapeless beige prison jumpsuit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The arrogant smirk that had charmed his way into the pockets of the elite was completely erased. The federal judge did not offer any leniency. He looked down at Julian with absolute disgust, detailing the massive scale of the wire fraud, the shattered lives of the victims, and the complete lack of any recoverable assets. The gavel struck the heavy wooden block, echoing through the silent courtroom. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. In the very back row of the public gallery, Vanessa sat completely alone. She watched as two large federal marshals hauled her husband to his feet, snapping heavy steel cuffs around his wrists and ankles. She did not cry out or run to the barricade. She simply stared with hollow, dead eyes as the man who was supposed to be her ticket to the billionaire lifestyle was escorted through the side door and out of her life forever. Vanessa walked out of the federal courthouse and stood on the busy city steps. She had no husband to provide for her. She had no social status to protect her. Her parents were destitute and working minimum wage jobs just to survive in a cheap motel. Her sister, the billionaire, was permanently unreachable, a ghost who had completely vanished from her world. Vanessa looked out at the sea of strangers rushing past her on the street, realizing with crushing, suffocating clarity that she was absolutely, entirely alone. 6 months later, the harsh reality of their situation had settled over them like a thick, suffocating blanket. The transition from the elite upper crust of Atlanta society to the absolute bottom of the working class had been swift and completely merciless. The luxurious, sprawling mansion, with its imported crystal chandeliers and perfectly manicured lawns, was nothing more than a painful ghost. In its place was room 114 at a discount motel situated right next to a noisy interstate highway. The carpet beneath their feet was a suspicious shade of brown that smelled faintly of old cigarette smoke and cheap industrial bleach. The wall-mounted air conditioning unit rattled violently, struggling to combat the oppressive humid heat that seeped through the poorly insulated window. It was a spectacular fall from grace, a brutal physical manifestation of their absolute financial ruin. Desmond, the man who used to sit at the head of a mahogany dining table, dictating the lives of everyone around him, was now working the night shift. He sat in a cramped fiberglass toll booth, wearing a cheap polyester uniform shirt with a generic security patch sewn onto the shoulder. The fabric itched against his skin, and the collar was too tight around his neck. He spent 12 hours a night staring out at a bleak asphalt parking lot, pressing a green plastic button to lift a boom gate for delivery trucks. He had nothing but time to sit in the cold glow of the sodium street lamps and replay every single arrogant mistake he had ever made. He watched wealthy executives drive past his booth in their luxury vehicles, and he realized with crushing clarity that they looked right through him exactly the way he used to look right through the working class. He had traded his loyal daughter for a mirage of elite status, and now he was guarding empty pavement. Clarice had suffered an even more brutal blow to her vanity. Her physical appearance had been her entire religion. She used to spend hours at the country club spa getting chemical peels and hot stone massages, wrapped in plush white robes while gossiping with other wealthy housewives. Now her hands were raw and blistered, constantly exposed to harsh bleach and industrial ammonia. She worked the graveyard shift for a commercial cleaning service because she was too deeply ashamed to be seen working during the daylight hours. She wore thick yellow rubber gloves, pushing a heavy plastic cart filled with trash bags and cleaning supplies down the silent, echoing corridors of a massive corporate high-rise in downtown Atlanta. She emptied trash cans filled with discarded coffee cups. She wiped down the heavy oak tables in executive boardrooms where million-dollar deals were made. The ultimate crushing irony of her miserable existence was entirely lost on her. She did not know that the building she was cleaning had been recently acquired by a corporate shell company. She did not know that the shell company was a direct subsidiary of my primary investment firm. My mother was spending the final years of her life on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floors of my empire just to afford her weekly rent at the discount motel. And then there was Vanessa, the golden child, the elite socialite who was destined for greatness. The harsh fluorescent lights of the restaurant kitchen buzzed above her head, casting a sickly pale glow over her exhausted face. The air was thick with the smell of old cooking oil and bleached dish rags. She wore a stained black apron over cheap non-slip shoes. Her feet throbbed with a dull, relentless ache from standing for 10 hours straight. She was carrying a heavy plastic tray stacked precariously high with dirty plates and half-eaten food. As she pushed her back against the swinging wooden doors to enter the main dining room, she suddenly froze. Walking through the front entrance, laughing and tossing their expensive designer handbags onto a leather booth were three women. They were the exact same women who had stood in her bridal party, the women who had drank top-shelf champagne at her bridal shower and gushed over her fake billionaire husband. Vanessa felt the blood completely drain from her face. Absolute suffocating panic gripped her chest. She turned around so violently the dirty silverware on her tray rattled together. She practically ran back into the stifling heat of the kitchen, pressing her back against the cool stainless steel of the industrial refrigerator. She hid there, trembling, listening to the faint sound of their laughter drifting through the doors. She was a total outcast, a public pariah, a cautionary tale to everyone she used to know. Thousands of miles away from their misery, the air in New York City was crisp and biting, carrying the distinct chill of late November. I stood on the wrap-around balcony of my penthouse apartment, looking out over the magnificent sprawling skyline of Manhattan. I was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal gray power suit, the fabric heavy and impeccably cut. The city below me was a glowing grid of endless possibility. The distant hum of traffic was reduced to a soft, soothing whisper from this high up. I held a delicate crystal glass of vintage red wine, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against my skin. There was no anxiety left in my body. There was no lingering guilt or residual trauma from my childhood. There was only a profound, unbreakable sense of peace. The soft glide of this glass door breaking the silence interrupted my thoughts. Gwen stepped out onto the terrace, holding a sleek black leather portfolio. Her face was illuminated by the soft amber glow of the balcony lights. She walked over to me and smiled, a bright, genuine expression of absolute victory. "The quarterly reports just came in, Harper," she said, handing me the thick file. "We did not just meet our projections, we completely shattered them. The new commercial development in Atlanta is officially breaking ground ahead of schedule, and the overall profit margins are breaking every single record in the company history." I took the folder, but I did not even need to open it. I knew exactly what we had built. "Thank you, Gwen," I replied, taking a slow sip of my wine. "You and the entire team have done incredible work. Make sure everyone gets their holiday bonuses early this year." Gwen nodded, making a quick note on her digital tablet. She looked up at me, her professional demeanor softening into genuine friendship. "Speaking of the holidays," she said, "what are your plans for Thanksgiving next week? Are you traveling anywhere?" I turned back toward the railing, resting my hands on the cool metal. I looked out over the brilliant, illuminated city, taking a deep breath of the cold, clean air. I thought about Desmond sitting alone in his toll booth. I thought about Clarice scrubbing floors until her back ached. I thought about Vanessa hiding in a greasy kitchen, terrified of her own shadow. I thought about the fact that they would be spending the holiday eating cheap microwave dinners in a dingy motel room, bitterly blaming each other for their ruined lives. "I will be staying right here, Gwen," I told her, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "I am hosting dinner for my executive team and a few close friends. We are having it catered by that new private chef you recommended. That sounds wonderful, she said, smiling warmly. It is always nice to spend the holidays with the people who matter. I nodded, watching a plane trace a slow blinking line across the dark night sky. You know, Gwen, I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, reflective tone. People spend their entire lives believing that family is defined by blood. They believe that sharing genetics means you have to share your life, your resources, and your sanity. But family is not defined by blood at all, especially when that blood is determined to drain you completely dry. Gwen stood quietly beside me, listening intently as the wind ruffled the collar of her jacket. If the people who are supposed to love you force you to shrink yourself just to earn a seat at their table, I continued, turning the crystal wine glass slowly by its delicate stem. If they demand that you hide your light so they can pretend to shine brighter, then they do not deserve your presence. You do not beg for a seat at a table where you are starving. You buy the whole damn restaurant and you build your own. I lifted the glass to my lips, taking one final confident sip of the rich dark wine. The taste was absolutely perfect. I looked out over the glittering, unstoppable empire I had built entirely with my own two hands, and I smiled. The story powerfully illustrates that true value lies in authenticity and character, not in superficial status or wealth. Desmond, Clarice, and Vanessa sacrificed their morals and their own family bonds to chase a hollow illusion of elite society, ultimately losing everything to a manipulative con artist. Harper, on the other hand, built genuine success through hard work and self-respect, refusing to let their toxic demands diminish her worth. The ultimate lesson is that treating family as disposable stepping stones will leave you completely isolated when your facade shatters. Real security comes from unshakable integrity, not from pretending to be someone you are not. Hit the like button and subscribe. If this story of sweet revenge resonated with you, and leave a comment sharing how you found the strength to walk away from toxic relationships.